zurück zu dem Stream. Wir sind hier für jetzt noch die letzten 2 Chapters anzuhören. Und das ist jetzt die finale Part von der Story, dass wir dann endlich am Ende sind von dieser PAW Lockdown Story. Es ist schon ich sag's nur, das ist eine lange Story, das ich gemacht habe auf meinem Kanal. Das ist eine lange Story. Ich habe noch nie so eine lange Geschichte angehört. Eine Horrorgeschichte von PAW. Noch nie. Und wie ihr es bemerkt habt, ich will nicht so viele Bilder wieder zeigen, weil wie ihr gehört habt, bei alle Chapters, es sind schon 3 tote Hunde. Es ist Summer, Rubble und Sky. Die kommen nicht mehr im Bild rein, weil die sind tot. Aber Rocky, Chase und Marsh und Liberty sind immer noch drinnen. Und deswegen habe ich Liberty ein bisschen verrutscht. Weil dort wäre der Platz für Summer, aber er ist tot. Und Junge, Leute, nur zu sagen, ich muss ja fast weinen wegen der Part, wo Summer wurde einfach dort gelassen wurde einfach dort verlassen vom Chase und Chase hat nicht einfach ihn mitgenommen einfach. Er hat einfach ihn dort gelassen, einfach. Und ich hatte gemeint, dass der Monster war tot, aber nein, der war noch am Leben, Alter. Oh mein Gott. Und das hat ihm dann, und der Monster hat ihm noch genommen. Aber er sagt, dass er lebt noch. Aber das müssen wir dann herausfinden und hören wir dann die 2 letzten Chapters, Chapter 22 und Chapter 23. Oh, das ist langsam spannend, Leute. Und ja, Leute, ohne Zeit zu verlieren, wir starten in einer Minute starten wir mit den Chapters anzuhören. Und ja, ich wünsche euch noch den Rest von diesen Chapters viel Spaß und hoffentlich enden wir das und dann am Ende von den Chapters werde ich euch ein Announcement, ein Infos geben und Updates, wie es weiter wird gehen, ob es wird da ein Full Story kommen. Dann ja, Leute, wir sehen uns dann am Ende von den 2 Chapters und ich wünsche euch mega viel Spaß. Und ja, bis nachher.
Lockdown, Paw Patrol. I don't have much time. Liberty frantically said into her collar as she ran, pushing through sharp bushes and tripping over logs. I need an extraction, get me out of here. Do you have the assets? The voice came through on the collar. And no, she said apologetically, the ACG intervened, they have all three of the dogs. A grimace was forced from her breath as a low branch smacked against her, pelting her fur with leaves. So, you lost all of them? Yes, I know, Liberty heaved, jumping behind a tree and looking back. I know, I lost them, I'm sorry. But I'm an asset too, right? Come get me, send a helicopter, please. Panic filled her voice as a long duration of silence came from the other end. Please. They're after me. Liberty. The voice began, I don't think we can do that. Why no? Alarm flared through the dachshund, and she crouched low under a bush in a desperate attempt to hide. You can't do that to me. We have other dogs here, ones that can actually do their job properly. The voice said coldly, what about the infection in the basement? Did you get a sample? Liberty winced, already knowing the answer. I had some set up. And? Then Zuma set off an explosion, incinerating the entire basement and all the things I had. Goodbye, Liberty. The dachshund nearly cried out, what? Ryder, no. Wait, you can't just leave me here. When cold, rejecting silence only met her, Liberty knew with a sinking heart that she had been abandoned. With a shaky breath, she prayed over and over for it to all be just a terrible dream, but every time she shut and opened her eyes the world around her just became even clearer. Panic filled her heart, and she cursed herself for ever trusting the Archline Foundation. She took a step back when she suddenly heard Chase's voice. Liberty. Whipping around in fear, she locked eyes with a German shepherd racing over the forest floor. Liberty. Chase panted, coming to a stop in a small pile of leaves. Enough with the games. You need to come with me, with them. He said, referring to the ACG. Just stop running. Frozen in her step, Liberty frantically thought over her options. If she went with the ACG, her involvement with the research company would be exposed, leaving her vulnerable to being pinned for every death committed by the claws of the creature. Even if she didn't release Ferox Malice directly, she'd be thoroughly interrogated for any information possible. Terror rose within her as she imagined herself breaking, completely giving up all of Archline's secrets to the military faction. Perhaps she would walk free the next day, only for her body to turn up mysteriously dead mere hours later. Archline had a way of silencing those who talked too much. Gears turning in her head, she remembered several contacts she had in Adventure City. All she needed to do was escape. Never. She snapped, baring her teeth, I'm getting out of here, now leave me alone. Swiftly turning around, Liberty kicked her legs and charged through the forest, kicking up leaves and twigs as she ran. Wah hey! Chase blinked, growling as he sprang into action. On any other day, he would have instantly run her down and caught her. Chase was by far the fastest dog in the Paw Patrol. Unfortunately, his speed was severely hindered by the burns and damage all over his body from the explosion. He could still run, but only at a reduced pace that was barely enough to keep up with the dachshund. Burned ears flattened, and he grimaced fighting through the pain. Leave me alone! Liberty shouted again, jumping over a log and running into a clearing. Breathing heavily from the exertion, she turned and sprinted to a denser collection of trees and foliage. There was a cave up ahead. A dark archway of stone under a canopy of moss and grass provided entrance to the forest cavern. It was big enough for a person to fit inside, and the pathway within dipped into a corridor that led to another part of the forest. The location itself was a favorite of Rocky's, as he always commented how it felt like traveling under a mountain to the other side of the land. The cave alone had nothing particularly notable inside it, save for some oddly shaped rocks and dripping puddles, but its darkness tended to be quite calming to one's mind. Without even thinking, Liberty sprinted headfirst into the cave, disappearing into the darkness. Relentless in his pursuit, Chase followed without hesitation, feeling cool air wash over him as he crossed inside. Paws scratching over the hard floor as he ran, the shepherd was almost blindsided by how amazing the air felt on his blistered, patchy skin. Almost completely negating the lingering pain, the interior of the cave was a perfect balance between warm and cold, soothing his agony into comfort. He almost broke the chase with Liberty to enjoy it, but he quickly snapped himself back to his senses. He could not allow the dachshund to escape. Liberty found herself stumbling several times over jagged rocks, cutting her paws as she scrambled to keep away from the shepherd. Frantically relying on her sense of smell and hearing to weave around the darkness, she splashed through a puddle, soaking her underside. As she crossed farther in, she emerged into the darkest depths of the corridors, a cold tunnel completely absent of light. Fearful of tripping in the dark, she came to a complete stop. With shaky breaths, she wanted to turn around and run, but doing so would put her right into Chase's clutches. She had to make it out, to brave her way through the depths of the cave to the other side. Running for what felt like hours, Chase slowly lost his vision as the light drained from the cave. He began to slow his pace upon realizing he was completely and utterly blind. Instantly skidding to a halt, canceling all of his speed in an instant, Chase stood firmly in the darkness. Growling in agitation, he could still feel the rocky ground under his paws, along with the gentle splash of cold dew on his back. Carefully placing one paw in front of the other, he blindly stepped over rocks, jagged debris, and drops he couldn't see the bottom of. Turning his ears in all directions, he listened to the sounds of his paws bouncing off the walls. With each step, each crinkle of the leaves, each splash of water, the sounds were crisp and subtle, confirming that he was still surrounded by walls. If his vision was gone for the time being, Chase would have to rely on all the skills a dog could have and use them to their fullest extent. He didn't have his flashlight, he didn't have his pup pack, and he certainly didn't have any of his spy gear, he only had himself. It was a game, a dance, Liberty and Chase lost in the darkness playing cat and mouse, nothing but their ears, noses, and instincts to guide them. Sniffing his nose, Chase absorbed the smells of the cave around him. A metallic sting hit his nostrils, almost making him sneeze in disgust, only to be followed by the cool air. A pungent stench of something foul came after, likely some animal that died in the cave, a smell he was tragically all too familiar with at this point. His paws passed over a grainy cool surface, then another step forward, and his right foot was suddenly dipped in cold water. Legs carrying him, he focused his nose again and sniffed the air. Instantly, a certain stench hit him like a train. Fear. It was always notable that animals had the unusual abilities to sense emotions, to seemingly detect when their owners were sad or afraid without ever having to tell them. It wasn't something Chase practiced often, sure he had heard of the feat, but he simply shrugged off the ability and focused on other things. He wasn't an expert, but the smell of fear was pungent enough that any dog could detect it right away. Liberty was terrified, stumbling through the dark and out of her element from the city. Chase keenly picked up on her scent in a way that almost outlined her in front of him. Entering his hunter instincts, Chase lowered his head and moved forward, heading straight for her. Strangely, the cave was growing slightly warmer and increasing steadily. He could smell smoke leaching in from the outside, a foreign smell he didn't understand. Shaking his head, he ignored the unwelcome stench and considered after her. It wasn't until he was mere meters away that Liberty finally picked up that danger was nearby. She snapped into alert, "Just come with me. Why can't you see the answer to all this?" Breaking into a run, the smaller dog trudged through the darkness. "You stay with them, Ferox Malice will kill you all." "You knew it was here." Chase barked, rage seeping into his voice. "You knew it was here and you let it all happen. Hundreds could be dead, half the patrol is gone." I'm not the one who killed Sky. Those words severed any last bit of mercy he could have had. Enraged, Chase snarled and completely ran her down, honing in on the sounds of footsteps in the darkness. Light began to gently illuminate the walls around them as they ran to the exit of the cave, the jagged, rocky interior finally becoming visible again. Liberty saw it too, and she quickened her pace, only for confusion to cloud her as she spotted the flickering orange flames that dotted the end of the tunnel. What the dash, she tried to say before she was violently tackled from behind. Teeth latched into the back of her neck as leaves and twigs went flying, and both dogs careened out of the cave and landed in the grass. Abrasively pinned onto her back, Liberty flailed helplessly as she tried to escape, panicking as Chase held her firmly. The shepherd didn't even notice that the forest was actively burning around him. You, he tried to form the words, after everything. After the city, after. He thought back to his short time spent in the Adventure City Pound. It was with Liberty's help he was able to escape, and it was then he fully believed the dachshund was the perfect gift to the patrol. You fucking traitor, he spat, I should have thrown you to Ferox Malice. Let me go. She tried to fight him off, we're going to burn alive. Burn. Chase faltered slightly, then finally flicked his gaze up and realized his surroundings. Both of them were completely cornered by a raging inferno that was slowly consuming the forest. The wave of heat finally hit him, and his eyes widened as his gaze rested on a single tree that had exploded into a star of fire, bleeding down flaming leaves. Adventure Bay was burning. Her captor distracted, Liberty quickly turned to her right, noticing a flaming stick that had fallen from the sky. Instantly seizing her moment, she grabbed the stick and swung it like a blunt weapon, connecting with Chase's face. The police dog yelped in surprise, staggering backward as he shook the fiery splinters from his head. Making a break for it, Liberty jumped up and ran as fast as she could into the burning foliage, and this time, Chase wasn't behind her. She ran for as long as she could, dodging falling trees to the best of her abilities. After a few minutes, her legs ached and were stained with ash, exhaustion befalling the small dog. Gasping, she huddled under a log and tried to protect herself from the heat and fire. Okay, she breathed, just need to get back to the city. Paws quivering, she drew further under the log. The sounds of splitting wood and crackling fire clouding her ears, she concealed herself as much as possible, believing she had finally found somewhere safe. Letting her guard down, she let out a slow breath. The sigh was cut off in an instant. A bloodied, degloved, five-fingered claw appeared from above and snatched her by the neck. She screamed in terror as her body was forcefully torn out from under the log, the bones in her arms painfully snapping into pieces. All she could do was scream helplessly as her body was pulled from the ground. Ferox Malice emerged from the darkness like a looming predator, snarling its rows of teeth and flashing its dozens of eyes, a face no longer concealed by the lost skin mask. No. Liberty pleaded for her life as she stared into the face of death, awkwardly flailing her broken arms. Standing on two legs, although squatting under the flaming trees to not burn itself, the creature only hissed in delight as it enjoyed her fearful screams. Even within her own cries, Liberty could faintly hear noises inside the creature's jagged ribcage. There was something inside it, something alive. Wait, you can't dash, the dachshund continued to beg, you're not dash. The creature's maw opened, flashing its lines of fangs as the tentacles within moved to impale its prey. Audrey. Liberty cried as a last-ditch attempt, Audrey, that's your name, right? That's who you were, right? That was your name. The claw only tightened around her body. I remember the dog you used to be. The dachshund pleaded, your name was Audrey, you. She cried in pain as more bones snapped within, you were a golden retriever. Don't you? She made eye contact with the creature, as best as she could manage with its several eyes. Don't you remember me? There was a pause. If Ferox Malice was truly as intelligent as Archline promised, then surely it could understand her. Even as its grip tightened, Liberty prayed with everything she had left that there was still an old glimmer of Audrey left in the monster. Screeching in seething fury, Ferox Malice gripped Liberty and punched her body into a tree that stood nearby, crushing the dog into its wood. The air was filled with agonized screaming as the prey was pulled from the tree and flung in the other direction. Her body collided with a set of rocks, violently crushing her ribs as she bounced off into the grass, bloodstains leaving a sharp trace of the impact. With any remaining strength left in her, Liberty tried to reach a paw out to crawl away. Springing into the air, Ferox Malice soared down and smashed its legs into her back, destroying her spine and crushing her inner organs. With its prey trapped, the creature roared as it clamped its teeth into Liberty's upper half, violently yanking and tearing her pinned body like a piece of meat in all directions. Blood splattered in the grass while clumps of fur and flesh were flung in the air. Finally, her body gave way, and Ferox Malice gruesomely ripped off the upper body, completely tearing the dachshund in half. Bits of bone and organs spilled out into the grass as the creature snapped its jaws, devouring it headfirst. Liberty's crushed lower half was kicked away into the flames, left to burn away into ash. With another body soon to join its inner hive mind, Ferox Malice reared its head back and roared its war cry into the smoke-shrouded air, announcing its bloodshed to all that was around to hear it. Straight face. Stay away from the trees. Cyrus called to whatever soldiers still remained behind him. His life flashed before his eyes as he sprinted into the flaming forest, a barrage of heat singing him under his armor as he entered. All around him, plants and foliage burned brightly, the trees having transformed into surging lights of raging flames. One by one, trees began falling, crashing to the ground and blasting flaming leaves and twigs in all directions. The Malinois grimaced in an attempt to turn his face away as flickering embers sprayed across him. Some of the soldiers behind quickly skidded to a halt, turning tail and fleeing out of the burning typhoon for their lives. Cyrus didn't blame them. A large part of himself also wanted to escape the forest fire and let it burn away. But Ferox Malice had fled, and under no circumstances could the monster be able to inflict any more damage than it already had. If it escaped the forest, it would attack the town and leave hundreds of bodies in its wake. It had to be stopped here and now. Bella, he called out, having to yell over the sound of weakened wood splitting apart, are you still with me? The retriever's call sounded a few feet back, right behind you, Captain. She was struggling to keep up with him, but a courageous spirit kept her going. The forest was unrecognizable. It truly seemed like every leaf and twig was ignited in burning agony. We can't lose any more of the Paw Patrol. Bella called, wincing as fiery debris signed across her face. We need to get them out of there. They both stopped as they heard Ferox Malice's vicious war cry echo through the forest, a signal that it had taken another victim. Cyrus hesitated for a moment, a brief flicker of fear rising within him that he quickly had to push away. I'm pretty sure most of them are gone, the captain winced, flattening his ears as distress fought to overcome him. What about Everest? We didn't find her body in the ski lounge. He looked back. Yeah, but her owner was completely ripped apart. There were pieces of him everywhere. Grimacing at the memory, Cyrus remembered his team moving through the mountains and coming across the wrecked ski lounge. It was painfully clear that Ferox Malice had attacked the place before traveling to Adventure Bay. It was how the ACG figured out the exact place to search for the creature to begin with, as the mountain was rather close in proximity to the town. The owner of the ski lounge, a man named Jake, was found completely slaughtered. A small investigation of the area revealed that he owned a Siberian husky, and the search began. Although blood belonging to a dog had been found at the site, her body was not uncovered. When have you ever heard of a dog abandoning its owner? He pointed out if Everest wasn't there, but her blood was. The only answer is that she was consumed. Or she escaped. I don't think he was cut off as a flaming tree dropped mere inches from his body, forcing him to a stop. A barrage of embers and splintered wood sprayed into the air as the wildfire around them only intensified more and more. The heat was becoming unbearable, and soon it would take them down in their burning branches. Jumping back, Bella howled as her tail hovered too close to an open flame, burning her and almost catching it alight. We're going to die in here. Hearing the pain of his sister in arms, Cyrus flattened his ears as he worryingly looked around in a panic. Perhaps Ferox Malus was already dead, lying in a pile of burned flesh and dead tissue long ago. He didn't want to abandon chase, but the fearful cries of the distant soldiers who followed him were becoming louder. The forest was soon to become a death trap, and as he flicked his gaze to the rifle attached to his side, he remembered his duty as a soldier. They died all the time for what they believed in, yet it was something else to be cast away into a ring of fire where survival was not in the cards. I won't leave them, the Malinois growled, itching to close the book on the massacre. I'm going ahead, come on. He stopped for a moment, briefly turning back to Bella, but, if you want to turn back, you can. I won't hold it against you. He held her gaze, a moment of connection between them both. Go back, Bella. I'm going to die in here. You don't have to. Panting from the heat, his companion looked uncertain, shaking her head slightly at her leader's words. Flicking her eyes around as she processed her situation, her expression changed to cold determination as she looked at him. Not a chance, Cyrus. We either escape together or die together. Sorrow hit Cyrus like a knife in the heart, only to quickly be replaced by anger, yet was then immediately smoldered by a spark of gratitude. The Malinois couldn't exactly say what he was feeling, so he only nodded in response, turning back to continue their trek through the fires. Wincing as they shoved through a wall of spiky brambles and dead flowers, they emerged into an open clearing that provided a small safe haven from the fires, although the edges of the area were lined with flaming trees on the verge of collapsing. A cave was nearby, barely visible through the smoke. Cyrus skidded to a halt as he spotted a puppy wandering aimlessly among the fire. Chase! He shouted. The police pup turned his head at the sound of his name, squinting his eyes as the pain hadn't fully left them from Liberty's attack. Cyrus? He shouted over the falling branches, she attacked me. Who? Liberty. He snarled, putting an arm over his eyes, she hit me with a fucking branch then ran away. We need to catch Dash. Swiftly jumping to him, Bella cut him off, forget her. We need to get you to safety before this whole forest comes down on us. Forest? Chase shook his head in wild confusion, his vision finally returning to normal. How did this even happen? We hit Ferox Malus with fire, Cyrus winced, realizing his mistake, only for it to turn around and run into here with a flaming tail. Now everything has gone to hell. He made a motion with his paw at Bella, grab him. We'll carry him out of the dash. Look out! Bella suddenly jumped in surprise, locking her eyes on the upper tree line. Chase could already see it by the time Cyrus turned around, and the three of them all drew back in terror. They had gone into the lion's den, and now it was time to face the monster. Ferox Malus jumped along the branches of the trees and leapt into the clearing, landing on all fours on the ground. Its tail already danced in the smoky air, moving in tandem with its tentacles. Get back! Cyrus called to the other two as he gripped his rifle and blasted the creature. Empty shells littered the grass and the snapping of the rifle mixed with the splitting wood. Chase panicked at the sound of the firearm and dove to the ground. Bella found herself frozen as she fought whether or not to help Cyrus or shield Chase. They were overexposed. All Ferox Malice had to do was charge into the open area and they were doomed. Into the trees, Bella called, seeing it all too clearly. The trees? Chase looked up at her, repeatedly darting his gaze around frantically. We'll burn alive. We're sitting ducks out here, where else can we go? Go. Run. Cyrus barked, flicking his tail to send them off. Sweat pooling under his paws, he fought to keep Ferox Malice at bay while the other two ran for the burning trees. The creature was growing more pissed off by the minute, scampering around to avoid the incoming fire. Even though bullets did little to actually kill it, they caused enough pain to render evasive action. The fire alone brought great fear into the creature, but it was determined to finish what it had started, no matter what pieces of itself it lost in the process. Backing up steadily, Cyrus's heart sank when the pop of his rifle went dry, leaving nothing but empty clicks. The flying bullet shells stopped, leaving him empty and powerless. A fearful noise slipped from the Malinois as his ears flattened, his eyes widening in terror at realizing he was vulnerable. Scraping its claws along the ground, Ferox Malice circled him as growls escaped from every orifice on its squirming body. The dead Labrador in its shoulder suddenly reared to life, like Zuma's own soul was dragged up and shoved back into him. The puppy opened its mouth, and a screeching war cry emitted from it, while Ferox Malice hissed a small heave, almost a laugh. Down its lower back, the mangled body of Liberty emerged as if it was hatching from an egg. Firmly attached to Ferox Malice's hip, the dachshund growled loudly as a tentacle slithered out of her mouth. The dogs they used to be were gone long ago, now infested and strung up inside the monster's bodily hive mind to be used like puppets. Glancing back to see his companions had successfully fled, Cyrus turned back to the monstrosity. You freak of nature. Ferox Malice swiped its claw across the ground and roared, preparing to leap. Thinking quickly, he snapped his paw to his vest and pulled a grenade. It was one of the few pieces of firepower he had left, with his rifle completely drained, and the only spare ammunition was back with the helicopters. This was his last grenade, and the only other thing he had was a silver revolver clipped to his waist, but it was nowhere near as strong as an assault rifle. He grabbed the pin in his teeth and pulled it out. Eat this. Flinging it with such force it made him dizzy. The small egg-shaped explosive sailed through the air and landed in the middle of the clearing. Having seen enough action to know the blast radius, Cyrus quickly turned tail and fled for the raging wildfires. Ferox Malice screeched and lunged at him, flying right over the active grenade. The explosive blast was deafening, a screeching crack through the air that made him flinch in his step. He flew through the flaming brambles, burning his fur down to the skin. Instantly he coughed out smoke as he entered the dense fires, eager to find his companions. With all the time he spent in fires and within explosions, Chase figured his body would grow more used to the scorching heat by now. He almost feared what it felt like to enter the cold this coming winter, assuming he survived the ordeal. Breathing heavily, he darted under the flaming trees, coughing out thick smoke. How did it even get this bad? Bella came to a stop beside him, her fur matted and scraped. It didn't look anything like this in the photos Archline sent. It fucking mutated. Snarled the shepherd. That's the problem with these stupid genetic labs, they think they have control but they really don't. That's how disease outbreaks are made. Even with her professionalism, the soldier couldn't help but agree. You're right. She breathed. If it helps, the captain has given the word, we've pulled out of the job. She was interrupted as Cyrus broke through the trees, his explosive movement startling Chase and causing him to jump under a bush. I think I got it. He said frantically, I think I dash. Gawk. Bella choked as a monstrous arm reached down from the tree branches, snatching her by the neck and pulling her off the ground. She lost the grip on her weapons, dropping them down below into a bed of flaming shrubbery. Bella. Chase shook under his breath as he witnessed his savior get dragged up into the trees. Struggling as hard as she could, she fought for her life as Ferox Malice lifted her into view, staring her down as it wrapped itself under the burning tree. No! Cyrus pulled his revolver and shot it into the air. The bullet whizzed past Ferox Malice's neck, completely missing it. Although the shot tore into the tree, dislodging a massive cloud of embers and flaming leaves onto the creature. Screeching as painful burns shot all over its back, Bella was dropped to the ground as Ferox Malice jumped from the tree and landed on the forest floor. Thinking of no other solution, the Malinois panicked, "Run!" But he was short-lived, as Ferox Malice swept its arm in a flash, catching Cyrus in the range and knocking him away. The dog's body harshly hit the trunk of a tree, the impact dislodging another rain shower of embers and flames. Cyrus was out, his weakened frame now laying a few feet away, his gun tossed out of his grip and fallen in the grass. He laid there sprawled out in the grass, his attack sparking an outbreak of terror among the remaining two dogs. Frantic, Bella tried to dive for Cryas's dropped revolver. The creature heard her movements without even looking, prompting it to regurgitate a tentacle from its mouth and swing it like a whip. It caught the dog's leg and ensnared her, and the creature yanked its head backward to fling its prey off balance. Bella shrieked as she left the ground and sailed through the air, slamming her against a tree. The impact of Bella hitting the tree caused a chain reaction, the sudden force dislodging an avalanche of flaming branches and foliage, all collapsing into a massive bed of fire. Chase watched the whole thing, anger slowly overcoming him at the realization that he would once again watch one of his friends be brutally killed. No longer thinking straight, the shepherd charged out from his concealment and went for the monster. Jumping teeth bared, he lunged for the creature, not exactly aiming for anywhere significant, just completely throwing himself at it. Snagging his teeth into the creature's leg, Ferox Malice whipped its head around in hostility. Lashing its claws, it grabbed Chase by the torso and yanked him off. "Don't do that," Liberty's voice hissed from beneath its flesh. Its ribcage began to split down the middle, cracking and wheezing as it slowly opened. Cracking open each of its ribs, its chest opened revealing a pulsating chunk of body mass. It resembled a tumor, yet it beat like a heart, with teeth lining each inner surface of the ribs. Dripping with crimson red blood and gore, an eye opened a few inches from the heart, then a second, then a third. Chase's anger died away as he stared into the bed of torment that was Ferox Malice's insides. The creature was heartless, yet it mutated far enough that it grew somewhat of an artificial heart. It needed the organ to power its new body, and the termination of such a bodily function could be a setback. It wouldn't die if the heart stopped functioning, however. Ferox Malice was far above organic limitations. "Tearing you apart is too good for you," Zuma's voice muttered from its shoulder, only to be replaced with rubble. "You're going to stay with me forever. We will be one, and you will watch." It spat the last word, "as I rip apart and devour every last one of your city's inhabitants. Die well, dog." The inner eyes all fixed onto Chase at the same time, as the pulsating heart began to shriek and writhe in agony. Dozens of small tendrils started to grow from it, reaching toward Chase with barbed tips. Now frantic, the shepherd struggled as hard as he could escape, but Ferox Malice refused to let him go. A vicious bark broke through the air as Cyrus sprang up, holding a flaming branch in his teeth. Ferox Malice flicked its many eyes over to him, disinterested, and more solely focused on the puppy in its claws. Its ignorance would soon be replaced with agony, as Cyrus jumped into the air and rammed the branch directly into its festering chest, splicing its heart with the blistering burn of fire. Screeching in pain from the attack, Ferox Malice recoiled and jumped backward, coming just a hair close to falling onto the recently created bed of fire. Gripping its chest in agony, the creature hunched over and started heaving. Even if it was highly resistant, it still felt pain just like any other living being. "Chase." Cyrus caught the puppy as he fell. "Can you breathe?" The police dog staggered over his own words, slightly disoriented. I think, his head fell back a little, and that was when Chase spotted the dropped revolver still sitting in the grass. Cyrus, your gun! Now furious, Ferox Malus screeched and turned its gaze back to them. The pain in its chest mixing with its own rage, the monster bared its claws and sprang for the two dogs in an instant. Look out! The captain cried, pushing Chase away at the last second. The puppy tumbled in the ash-covered grass just as the Malinois was tackled by the monster. Quickly he rolled on his side, scrambling for the gun and jumping for it. His paws landed on the metal firearm. It was slippy and humid from the heat. Feeling the weapon, immediately a wave of static entered Chase's head, but he ignored it. Gripping the firearm, he held it up in his paws and turned back to his captain. Cyrus, I have your dash. He stopped cold. The Malinois was helpless to physically fight off the might of the creature. In seconds he was retrained in the tendrils, and he was dragged up as the heart pulled him in. Cyrus. The soldier heard his call, trying to fight through the pain. Chase, you need to He screamed as the ribs closed into him, slowly impaling through his skin like they were eating him alive. Instantly, the heart inside got to work, beginning to slowly pull and rip away Cyrus's skin while the ribs held him in place. Ferox Malus merely purred through the ordeal. Zuma's body began laughing uproariously, like a twisted flicker of life still remained in it. Rubble and Liberty's voices could be heard laughing in tandem, all celebrating the brutal execution. Aha! The soldier writhed in agony as his body was slowly eaten into, the heart mere moments from finally breaking through the muscle layer. Chase. You need to dash. I dashed. The puppy was frozen in terror. What am I supposed to do? You need dash. Even in his pain, Cyrus knew what had to be done. The heart was a weak point, not vital, but weak enough. Although now his body was acting as a meat shield for it, the ribs firmly holding him in place. Knowing what needed to happen, Cyrus had to make a difficult decision. You need. He gritted his teeth. You need to shoot through me. What? Chase recoiled at the words. Shoot through me. You have to. Chase's heartbeat went frantic, his eyes widening while his ears drew back. Instantly, all the sound in the world went silent, leaving him in a cold stasis of his thoughts. All he could hear and think of was Sky. He killed her, pulled the trigger on the cockapoo without a word. The regret and anguish that followed nearly ate him alive, forcing him to slowly overcome his own mistakes just to account for his past. Just when he thought it was all over, here he was again. Taking another innocent life. I can't. The puppy cried, I can't kill you. Do it. Cyrus snarled angrily, desperately trying to hold out. The fires that burned around them only intensified, like a twisted audience eagerly awaiting the bloodshed. Chase looked around frantically, briefly laying eyes upon Bella lying motionless a couple of feet away. She couldn't do it, it had to be him. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he held the gun up, aiming for Cyrus's chest. Paws shaking in fear, he found himself unable to pull the trigger. Please, I don't want to do this. You have to. Cyrus was pleading now, you nag. Finish it. The puppy struggled to form words, Ferox Malus's own laughter beginning to fill the air. Malicious at heart, it slowly held Cyrus suspended, not outright killing him, knowing the terror it would instill into the shepherd. It wanted to watch it all, feel it all, drink the fear like a powerful drug, and it wanted every last drop. Fearfully holding the gun like a slippery animal trying to escape, the static in Chase's head blooming into a thunderstorm of chaos, fighting to keep him down. His mind flickered with memories and voices, images flashing while his claw was centimeters from the trigger. He saw nothing but Sky, the memory of her murder playing on repeat over and over, constantly forcing him to watch it again. In a twisted game of cruelty, his own mind replaced Sky with Marshall, then Rocky, making him witness himself murdering his own loved ones to tear his heart even more. Was he really a killer? Chase. Sky's voice echoed in his ears, as he remembered her moving toward him. No. Chase broke through it at the last minute, pulling the trigger. The gunshot pierced through the air, tearing through Cyrus's body. The soldier flinched as a coldness shot into him, exiting out his back. Ferox Malice screeched the loudest it ever had, its chest exploded outward in a cloud of blood and organic biomass. Its ribs shattered out, falling like broken pieces into the ashy ground, along with Cyrus as he was dropped. Staggering backward, the creature gripped its bleeding chest with both hands, trying to fight through the pain that now surged through every bone and tentacle it had. It wouldn't die from it, but the shock had nearly paralyzed it, clouding its vision and buckling its limbs. Forced back to all fours, as it no longer had the strength to stand up, it made a feeble effort to cover the wound with its tentacles. It tried to roar out something in a stolen voice, but none of the bodies were responding, the mental connections frozen from the physical shock. All that left its mouth was a defiant screech, screaming as loud as it could as a final desperate attempt to ward off its attacks. Chase dropped the gun and ran for Cyrus, tears already in his eyes. Ferox Malice panicked and turned to run in a random direction, only for its leg to clip a fallen tree, tripping the entire creature. Seemingly in slow motion, the monster fell forward over the raging bed of fires, helpless to save itself. With a massive sound of splitting wood and raging fire, Ferox Malice crashed directly into the flames. In an instant, it lit up like a burning star, its flimsy body almost as flammable as paper. It could avoid fire before in small amounts, knowing the death it would bring, but Ferox Malice had nowhere to run to. In the time it took to get back on its feet, its body was already completely aflame. Zuma's corpse caught fire, prompting it to flail its arms and hiss in rage. In mere seconds, it went limp, the Labrador's carcass burning away to the skeleton underneath. Screaming in agony, using a mix of Rubble and Liberty's voices, it struggled to recalibrate its vision. It tried to use its tentacles to jump up the burned trees, but they had already burned black and fallen off, its tail included. It could already feel the fire burning into its organs, disintegrating its tendons and nerves, leaving them as nothing but ash. As horrible pain flared through the monster, the fires eating away at its body, it meekly reached an arm into the air, trying to grab a tree. The rest of its limbs seemingly gave up, sprawled on the burning ground as the flames charred them to the bone. Reaching for any last escape, almost looking like it was reaching for the heavens, the arm finally gave up, falling lifelessly into the fire. The rest of the body collapsed, Ferox Malice's strength leaving it as the flames swallowed it whole. The flames soon died down, revealing a blackened skeleton of a monstrous animal. All biomass was burned away, with not an ounce of blood or hair remaining. Every tentacle and tendril was gone, the dozens of eyes that stared into your soul vanished, its claws lifeless and unmoving. Even with the living flesh gone, the bones remained in the flames, the heat making short work of any possible molecule left of the parasite. Ferox Malice was dead. For all the damage it could escape, for all the attacks it could withstand, Ferox Malice could not survive fire. The terror, the bloodshed, the massacres, it was all finally over. Cyrus. Chase cradled the soldier's head, as he was significantly larger in size. Speak to me, please. The soldier gasped slightly, his eyes fading dull as his limbs and tail went limp. Cyrus. He cried again, the puppy's voice cracked, I'm so sorry. Tears flooded from his eyes, I'm so sorry. The trees began to collapse around them, the forest finally losing its stability from the fire. I'm sorry. He whimpered, holding the larger dog. fearfully looking around, he saw only the fires crashing down. For a moment, he considered running away. It would probably save his life, but he had no idea where to go. The last time he was here, he used Feroxmalis's roars to find his way back, and last time there definitely wasn't a forest fire. He thought of Marshall and Rocky, his last remaining family. They were in the care of the ACG, no further harm would come to them. Sadly, looking back down at the fallen soldier, he knew what he had to do. He didn't want to leave them like this, but perhaps his family could remember him by his loyalty, to end on a good note. Something to overwrite the horrible memory of Sky's death. Dogs were loyal to their masters, from the moment they were first held, to the final minutes of their lives. It was a doctrine they stuck to, proudly upholding the title of man's best friend. But who was Chase's master? It wasn't Ryder, not after all this, and what was a dog without an owner? It wasn't Rocky or Marshall, and Chase refused to call himself an owner. It was practically taboo for a dog to do so. That left Cyrus. The captain had been there from the beginning. He tried time and time again to protect Chase from the horror that Feroxmalis would bring. The puppy didn't listen, and by knowing too much, innocence died. Cyrus protected him as much as he could and saved his life from the creature's grip. He wasn't an owner, nor a master, but Chase couldn't deny he saw the captain as his leader more than Ryder ever was. Sighing softly, the sorrow bleeding from his breath, Chase gently folded his limbs and settled down in the grass, resting his chin on the soldier's arm. The sounds of splitting wood signaled the trees were falling, as the sky blotted out from the smoke. Closing his eyes, Chase accepted the end, knowing that the deed was done. The horror, the static, the screams, it was all over for good. While the flames fell, a helicopter zoomed overhead, coming to a stop as it hovered. Multiple dogs could be heard barking orders, but Chase didn't care to listen. Resting beside his leader, he gently smiled in contentment as the forest crashed on top of them.
Oh mein Gott. Sorry Leute, aber wir mussten. Sorry, hab ich ihn nicht. Okay, beruhig dich. Beruhig dich. Okay, wir hören noch die letzte. Und dann.
Login, sign up.
Ups, das war das nicht. Okay, das ist der letzte Teil. Der letzte Chapter. Final Chapter. Chapter 23.
Lockdown, Paw Patrol. It was the duty of local law enforcement to uphold and defend the people of Adventure Bay, to protect them from harm and bring peace into their hearts that the streets were safe. Marshall stopped raging fires, Rocky cleaned up the environment and restored beaches, Sky patrolled the clouds and watched the weather while Zuma raced to help those at sea. Rubble was the construction dog, always volunteering his help when things had to get a little hands-on, and Chase was the sworn police dog who pledged to keep the streets safe. A few days before the death of the Paw Patrol organization, Feroxmalis was unleashed into the wild. It tore through the mountains, wreaking havoc on anything it came across before coming to Adventure Bay. The ACG was dispatched shortly afterward to keep the monster in check, not realizing the shady foundation they were taking orders from, nor the persistence of the 6 puppies determined to do their part. The good die young, and in a stroke of tragedy several dogs were killed off, yet still, they persisted. It wasn't until Chase was burned in the explosion that he finally understood where he went wrong. He foolishly believed that he understood the severity of the situation and that he was more than ready to handle something greater than he ever was. After rising up from the ruins of the lookout, Chase gave up trying to rebuild the Paw Patrol. Rubble and Sky were gone, Zuma had gone mad and was abandoned down below. There was no way they'd ever function again, and the shepherd didn't care to try anymore. He was so sure that he was going to die in the forest. As Chase sat down next to the fallen Cyrus, he silently made peace in his heart, ready to give up the fighting. Ferox Malus was dead. The horrible monster who ruined everything was finally put down and destroyed. That fact alone was good enough for him, and he surrendered his life. Unfortunately, his remaining family was not fond of losing him and convinced the ACG soldiers to retrieve him from the burned forest. He was laying on something soft and puffy, his body cradled in gentle warmth. Chase stirred slightly as his consciousness returned to him, his ears picking up voices nearby. Huh. He slowly opened his eyes with a pained breath, and instantly regretted it as a bright light flashed onto his pupils. Where am I? He breathed out, trying to focus his vision in the highly lit room. Blinking his eyes against the light, he realized he was sitting in a dog bed, a blue blanket lovingly draped over him. He was in a room with white walls and tile floors, multiple desks of odd equipment set up against the walls. Confused, he sat up a little, when a voice suddenly emitted from his left. Rocky leaned in, gently nudging his paw at Chase's side. Hey. His voice was calm and collected, but the pure joy hiding inside it was threatening to break out. The injured shepherd whipped his head around in surprise, then suddenly groaned as a blistering pain shot through him. The mix drew his paw back. Whoa, take it easy. You're not all that healed yet. Rocky? Chase blinked. Where am I? Katie's pet parlor. What? The shepherd said as his ears perked up, appalled that the building was still standing. You got me out of there? Of course we did. Rocky's voice went soft, smiling gently. Did you think we were leaving you to die? Chase took a moment to answer, sighing with light contempt. I wouldn't have blamed you if you did. Oh, don't say things like that. The mix shook his head slightly, affectionately patting Chase's burned paw. I'd never leave you anywhere if I could help it. He shrugged, smiling. There may not be much left of us, but we're still a team. Moved by Rocky's kindness, Chase felt he was about to cry. Even after everything he had done, the atrocities he pulled, his old friends still refused to give up on him. He realized right then how much he didn't deserve such a loving family, and the shepherd was forced to turn his head away so his brother wouldn't see the tears. Unfortunately for him, Rocky knew him better than anyone. Hey, the mix lowered his voice, moving a little closer to his emotional friend. It's okay, man, it's gonna be okay. He draped his gray arm around the shepherd, not caring about the rough patches of hairless skin he was brushing against. Chase had suffered great physical damage to his body, and even if the blisters dried and healed, it was unlikely that the missing portions of fur would ever grow back. A caring soul at heart, Rocky hugged his brother closely, and Chase fought with every fiber in his being to not completely break down. It was an almost celebratory embrace, that after all the terror and bloodshed, the family still remained together. Half of them were gone, maybe, but they had each other nonetheless. Gently breaking the hug, Rocky tried to give Chase a reassuring smile, but still the shepherd tried to avoid his gaze. Yet even as he desired to stay quiet, he knew what needed to be said, something he was itching to get off his chest. But first, he had other questions that plagued his mind. So where's everyone else? Outside the room, I believe. Rocky flicked his ear to the door. Marshall, Bella, and a whole lot of soldiers. Bella? She's alive? Suffered a beating, but yes. Chase felt guilty, the memory of Cyrus's death flashing before his eyes. His mind was broken, and his unstable mental state wasn't going away anytime soon. Katie isn't there? He asked, wondering about the owner of the pet parlor. The mix gave a sad sigh. We couldn't find her, she's gone without a trace. It was a further stab in the gut to realize that even more ulterior motives could be at work, but Chase chose not to think about it. Rocky, he hesitated, and the mix instantly gave him his full attention. I don't think I I don't think I'm fit to be the leader of the Paw Patrol. Of course you are, the mix replied quickly, we need you, and... He trailed off for a moment, well, we just need you. You're one of us. And I need you, Chase confessed with a sigh, and Marshall, but I... He shook his head, hating the words leaving his muzzle, but I just can't go on after all this. I don't have it in me anymore. The mix frowned as he listened, looking to the ground in confusion and slightly hurt inside, but, we're the Paw Patrol. Rocky, the Paw Patrol doesn't exist anymore. The gray dog pulled a mortified face, drawing his ears back in shock. He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out, because deep down he knew, Rocky knew just as well that their lifelong occupations were now laid to ruin along with the tower. He hated admitting it, but he silently nodded. I guess so, but... He chuckled slightly, I'm just used to, well, you. You lead us, you were the one that we looked up to. His words carried heavy sorrow, almost mournful, if you're not the leader, then who is? Chase smiled at his brother, resting his chin down on the edge of the bed. I already told you back in Ryder's garage, didn't I? Why no, Rocky suddenly drew back. Chase, I thought you were, look I can't dash, he stuttered over himself. Rocky, up to this point, you've been everything that I was supposed to be, Chase explained, sighing to himself, you're caring, you listened to reason, you kept us together, and you stayed strong through it all. He was talking freely now, and I was, well, arrogant, you saw what I did. I made rash decisions, put others in danger, and I'm not in a good place mentally. Chase. You, he cut the mix off, are the leader that we need and deserve. He pushed himself up slightly, meeting Rocky's gaze, in fact, with what few flickers of the Paw Patrol still remain, let my last notion as the leader. He choked over his own words, not wanting to give up what he worked so hard to uphold, be that I give up my title and grant it to you. Rocky was stunned, sitting wide-eyed, yet he remained quiet. Congrats, Chase shrugged with a smile, you're in command now. In fact, I think you always were, now that I think about it. It was official, the police dog had tossed his badge away and given up his position. He didn't dare say it out loud in front of Rocky, but for all intents and purposes, he considered Chase to be already dead, burned to death in Zuma's explosion. The shepherd didn't even care to think of himself as still alive, knowing he was nothing like the dog he used to be. Whatever Paw Patrol could possibly remain, it was all Rocky's to shape and mold. The mix was dumbfounded, I don't dash. He was interrupted as the door swung open, prompting both dogs to turn their heads in response. Chase. Marshall bounded in, overjoyed. The shepherd froze, flinching, wait please don't dash. To his relief, the Dalmatian skidded to a halt, coming to a stop before him. Don't worry, I'm not gonna grab you or crash, you're probably really tired of that. He said with a nervous chuckle, I'm glad to see you're okay. I was worried. Unable to contain his joy, Marshall leaned forward and licked Chase across the cheek. He instantly flung his tongue away, making a disgusted face, ugh. He gagged, his tongue freely hanging out, you taste awful. Rocky snickered, dude, he was in like 2 fires, then ran through a burning forest. I'm pretty sure his body is covered in ash and debris and whatever shit you get covered in when you catch on fire. Hey, language, Marshall quipped, trying to brush off his tongue, I just wanted to show I was happy to see you again. Chase smiled at the endearing firefighter, I'm glad for it, really. You're always the over-affectionate type, Rocky rolled his eyes, although was trying to hide a smile. Marshall fired back swiftly, I'm not. Eh? Oh really? The Dalmatian said with sass in his voice, we're dogs, I thought licking was our thing. Chase sat up in his bed, it has many meanings. Some see it as a greeting, could be a sign of care or love. Okay, then that, Marshall pointed out his words, I care, that's it. That's what I'm showing, I'm not being mushy or whatever. Rocky stifled his laughter, oh yes, because no one is worthy of the great Marshall's love. He laughed at his own comment and even more when he saw Chase trying to hide his own amusement. The Dalmatian drew back, a shocked expression on his face. The shepherd between them chuckled, you're gonna have a hell of a time finding a mate, dude, narcissism ain't attractive. I'm not a narcissist. Well, guess what? Rocky lowered his chest to the floor, getting into a playful stance as he wagged his tail. As the leader, I declare you the patrol narcissist. You can't just dash, Marshall quickly stopped, catching the first part of the sentence. Wait, what? He raised an eyebrow. You're not the leader. Chase cleared his throat, speaking softly with a faint hint of shame. Yes, he is. I've decided to give him the title. You did? I hope this isn't too difficult for you, the shepherd winced. The last thing I want is to tear us apart even more, but please understand. Rocky nodded calmly, trying to maintain his composure. Marshall seemed aback, and the Dalmatian kept flicking his eyes between each dog like he was struggling to comprehend the statement. For a moment Chase was worried he wouldn't take the news well when the firefighter spoke again. Are you leaving? No. Chase insisted, I'm not going anywhere, don't worry. I'll always be here. He smiled softly, praying he sounded sincere enough. It was unheard of for anyone else other than the signature German Shepherd to lead the squad, yet Chase sometimes wondered how he got the title in the first place. After some time, Marshall spoke up again, lightening up, Ugh, God, I have to take orders from you? He joked, what, are you gonna make me use environment-friendly fire hoses? The three of them broke into uncontrollable laughter, celebrating their unity as a trio. It was the first time they shared a good laugh in days, and it felt as refreshing as a cold glass of water in the middle of the night. Well, Rocky giggled, flicking a tear from his eye, it wouldn't be a bad start. As they bickered and joked among themselves, the door to the room gently creaked open as another dog pushed through. The three dogs turned to look as a Labrador retriever entered their midst. Bella. Chase perked up, you're okay. The soldier gave a faint laugh as she walked up to them, I suppose, heh. Her fur was incredibly disheveled and cut in several places, as her body was slowly recovering from being thrown into a tree. I'm just glad that you're alive, things were terrible back there. Despite wanting to laugh it off, Chase frowned as the memories of the burning forest circulated around him. To say things were terrible was an understatement, especially with the tragic loss of the ACG captain, Cyrus. The Malinois made every attempt to stop Chase from opening the door to catastrophe, and even afterward he still fought tooth and nail to save his life. The death of the noble dog plagued him into a field of guilt, believing for a moment it was all his fault, and it technically was. I'm sorry about Cyrus, he bowed his head. With a sigh, Bella sadly nodded, don't blame yourself. We're soldiers, we die so people can sleep soundly, and without him, Ferox Malice would still be alive. It's dead? Rocky piped up, perking his ears, it's all over? Bella gave a gentle nod, although in the back of her mind, a sinking feeling was threatening to come up. There was something she wasn't telling them, something she was directly withholding. The truth that Ferox Malice may be dead, but things were far from over. The Archline Foundation was coming for them, seeking to reclaim anything they could to compensate for the loss of the monster. Chase, Marshall, and Rocky were assets to them now, and the research facility would fight to capture them. They weren't safe in Adventure Bay, and far as Bella could see, there was only one safe place for them to go. Actually, she admitted, I need to talk with you three about something. The puppies turned their heads, giving the soldier their attention. Rocky and Marshall were still smiling, but Chase could smell that something was off. Struggling to get the truth, Bella looked aside as her ears fell. The ACG is pulling out of Adventure Bay. Now that the threat is gone, there's no reason for us to be here anymore. A wince left her muzzle, but there's a pretty solid chance that Archline will come in once we're gone. Why? Chase tilted his head. Everything the creature made was destroyed, there's nothing to retrieve. No, they want you, clarified the soldier, drawing her ears back a little. To them, you're valuable assets now. Also, they don't want news of this leaking to the public, and since you're the main witnesses, she growled slightly, your capture will silence you from speaking out against them. Capture? Came Rocky's alarmed voice. Indeed, Bella sighed, and I'm pretty sure they did the same thing to a husky up in the mountains. See, we came across a ski lodge Ferox Malice had likely attacked prior to this town. She thought for a moment. We informed Archline about the site, but they told us to forget about it, and now they're coming here. Chase narrowed his eyes for a moment, thinking back. I talked to Liberty for a moment before she vanished. She did say that Archline was coming to rescue us. Well, that was a gigantic lie. Bella rolled her eyes, then hesitated. Well, maybe a half lie. Maybe they were coming, but it sure wasn't a rescue. A groan left Rocky. Ugh, it never ends. What are we supposed to do now? Shuffling her gloved paws a little, Bella thought over how to word what she was going to say. It wasn't going to be easy getting this out. Well, I told you the ACG was leaving, and, she sighed, deciding to just get it out. I was wondering if, maybe you wanted to come with us? All three puppies reacted at the same time, a mix of confusion and surprise. Some words were said, but their voices overlapped and Bella couldn't understand them. Just listen to me, she held up a paw. You're telling us to leave Adventure Bay? Marshall interrupted her, disturbed panic in his voice. This is our home, we can't just go away forever. It's not forever, per se, Bella pointed. You'd be able to visit if we ever found ourselves back here. Rocky's voice was filled with confusion. But where are we going? With us, like I said. But where? Chase caught what his brother was implying. Where are you going to take us? I don't want to go anywhere. Marshall stamped his paw. The puppies demanded answers, and the soldier winced knowing the answer wasn't going to be pleasant. The ACG couldn't just take 3 dogs under their wing. The guild didn't work that way. They were a strike team, and any rescued people or animals would be turned over to whoever hired them in the first place. The ACG never directly took new recruits from missions like these, but the only other option was a dark one. If you stay, Bella began, answering Marshall first, the Archline Foundation will come for you. They'll either capture you quietly in the night or do a full-scale invasion. They will do anything to get what they want, no matter who gets in the way. She took the time to sit down, letting her tail rest on the floor. We won't be there to protect you this time. Her words hung in the air like a cloud of gloom, knowing that a depressing fate awaited the puppies if they stayed behind. Marshall was still in denial, keeping his belly low to the ground like he was trying to glue himself to the floor. Looking down, Rocky pondered the information he learned, silently fighting the love for his home over the safety of his family. Chase was oddly silent. Ultimately he was indifferent to the decision, a part of him almost wanting to be left behind. There's another way, the larger dog continued. If you leave with us, you'll be enrolled as a soldier in our legion. What? Rocky flicked his eyes at her. I'm not a soldier, I can't even hold a gun. There are plenty of jobs and roles in the ACG that don't involve combat, believe it or not. She smiled slightly. Field agents, medics, you name it. How would being soldiers protect us? Marshall said, speaking up. It's not so much being a soldier, it has to do with giving yourself a new identity. Bella looked to the Dalmatian. By taking new allegiances, donning our colors and wearing our masks, Archline will never find you again. she said softly, you're connected to this land, the entire Paw Patrol was. Adventure Bay made its name thanks to you, and Archline knows this. The town, the city, the islands, Foggy Bottom, the mountains, Barkingburg, they will rip them to shreds hunting you down. Because in their minds, there's nowhere else you'd be. They're going to attack? Chase said, aghast, isn't there anything we can do? Not right now, no. Bella sadly shook her head, they'll just pay off the government to keep quiet. Homes will be rebuilt, police will turn a blind eye, the media will be silenced, it'll be like they were never there. She thought momentarily, perhaps one day, we'll be hired to take them down, maybe. The three dogs went silent at their final choice. They could stay in Adventure Bay, but were doomed to run while Archline tore their way to them. But if they left with the ACG, where they'd be safe, they'd have to put down their collars and badges, surrendering their identities. I know this is a hard decision, Bella sighed, then stood up. Her tired legs could be heard cracking slightly from the strain. I'll leave you to it. I some business to attend to before we pack up our things. Turning around slowly, the soldier walked out of the room, leaving the dogs alone with their thoughts. Marshall was the first to speak, his voice low and afraid. Are we going to die if we stay? Sighing, Rocky tried to find a good answer to the question, but instead decided to be honest, most likely. He confessed. But if we become soldiers, won't we be at just as much risk of dying on the field? She did say they had other jobs besides basic assault, Chase shrugged, tapping his burned paws on the ground. Marshall would be a good medic. Well, the Dalmatian opened his mouth to argue, but stopped midway. I guess, but I've never treated a bullet wound before. All the more reason to learn, the mix pointed, tilting his head a little. Marshall narrowed his eyes, leaning back a little as he stared at his lifelong friend. You're not seriously thinking about going with them? We can't leave Adventure Bay. When Rocky responded with only silence, the firefighter became antsy, looking toward the third dog for any support. Chase? We can't just leave, right? The shepherd looked up, gazing into Marshall's blue eyes. Marshall, if we stay, we die. He said simply, sadness dripping from his tongue. But what we don't? The Dalmatian said, firing back almost immediately, what if we go quietly? Maybe Archline won't so bad if we surrender. Won't be so bad? Rocky questioned. They willingly released Ferox Malice into the wild, knowing full well it would wreak havoc, all for the sake of a field test. So? I don't think Archline has any concept of moral standards. It won't matter if get caught or surrender peacefully, if they can create creatures like that. I shudder to imagine what they'd do to us. Now appalled, Marshall drew back slightly, shrinking down a hair. Given how long they were exposed to the infection, one wouldn't blame Archline for writing off the dogs as infected as well. A wave of torture would soon follow, testing, prodding, sampling, experiments, tests, and horrendous acts of twisted cruelty would be inflicted on the puppies. Perhaps Marshall was right and they wouldn't die at first, but when Archline was finished with them, they'd spend the rest of their lives wishing they had. I want to protect you. Rocky stopped himself. Protect us, I want to protect all of us. He changed his sentence on the fly to include Chase, wanting to reassure the shepherd that he was still part of the family. And since I speak for both of you now, he paused, looking to the side, then I say we go with them. His gaze hardened, looking at Marshall in the eye. We are joining the Assault and Containment Guild. For he sharply continued before the black-spotted dog could speak up, for the sake of our safety, and to give us a better chance of living out the rest of our lives. So, he concluded, sighing, what do you two say? Silence, only the low hum of the overhead lighting could be heard. They stirred in awkward discomfort for a cold minute, each one refusing to meet the other in the eye. Tapping his dull claws on the tile, Marshall looked back up to Rocky, his face going stern. Slightly puffing out his white chest a little, he spoke firmly, "I don't want to do this." He said flatly, "I know why we need to, and I understand that, but I don't want to do this." "Marshall, I'm not leaving you behind," the mix said calmly. Still the firefighter was quietly defiant, and he stood up completely on 4 legs. "Well, I don't want to leave my home and life behind. I get it, I'm not crazy about it either, but I don't see any other option. You're asking me to throw away everything I used to be. It's not like we're changing our names or anything. I don't want to do it, Rocky." The ruffled dog looked to his right. "Chase? What about me?" The shepherd looked up suddenly, irritation written on his face. "Why does this keep coming back to me?" "I dunno." Marshall trailed his paw along the ground a little. "You usually have the final say." Frustrated, Chase let a growl slip. "I don't have the final say." "He does." A flick of his paw at Rocky was all the message he should have needed. It was obvious that still Marshall was getting used to the sudden change in leadership, but they'd have to take it in stride if they were to continue on. "Well, the Dalmatian started but faltered in his words. He tried to form a cohesive thought, another bite back at the situation to give himself further footing. Yet he had nothing, his fire defeated, leaving his denial in shambles. With a quiet sigh, Marshall sat back down, with nothing left to spit from his tongue. "Okay," he said finally, "let's do it. Let's go with them." Nodding in slight relief, Rocky was happy he finally had someone on board. That only left one dog to cast his voice, although he was already outvoted. "Well, Chase." Rocky looked to the shepherd. "Where do you want to go?" The retired officer only shrugged. "Wherever you need me. I need you at my side. Then I'll follow you until the day we die." It was decided. The 3 dogs all nodded at one another and took a few minutes to accustom themselves to the major decision. Although their old lives had now ceased to exist, perhaps it was time for something new to begin. "All right," Rocky stood up, "I'll go talk to Bella." Straight face. The light and warmth of the day almost perfectly shrouded away the terrors that occurred at the lookout. The ruins of the destroyed tower resembled nothing more than a demolished building set to be wiped away. There was no more darkness to fear, as the sun had generously illuminated every corner and passage of the crash site, even spreading its light into exposed areas of the basement underneath. The forest that once surrounded the lookout was completely devastated, burned into ash and charred wood that provided a lock and key for the thousands of dead bodies that lay under it. The public took notice of the tower's demolition mere minutes after emerging from their homes. They had all been huddled under shelter from the tropical storm that had passed over, leaving minor broken windows and snapped telephone poles that were easy to fix. Upon walking outside, the people instantly realized that the distant shadow of the tower was no longer present. The ACG was forced to set up a perimeter outside town, blocking the main route to the tower to avoid any nuisances. Many lies left the tongues of the soldiers that afternoon, similar stories of the PAW Patrol being hit by the storm and needing to evacuate. While most of the general public left despite their concerns, the kind-hearted mayor of the town knew something was off. However, she could only protectively hold her dear pet chicken, backing away defeated once an ACG soldier barked at her to leave. Many papers were written, scanned into machines, and packed into folders. Armored dogs milled about, combing the area until they were completely satisfied there were no more traces of any infection. Once their search was completed, their equipment was folded up into crates, and several military helicopters descended down from the bright sky. A single dog was sitting before the wreckage of the tower, staring almost longingly at the life he left behind. Chase gazed at each broken piece, each snapped rod of steel, and his heart only further shattered. A small backpack was in the grass a few inches away, packed full of any essentials or objects he couldn't bear to part from. He didn't have that many valued possessions, as the backpack was mostly carrying clothes and stale treats. But there was one object safely packed within, a framed picture of the Paw Patrol, all 6 dogs alongside the leader, Ryder. They all had wide overjoyed smiles, a blind innocence to the horrors that occurred so naturally in the twisted, unfair world. Their kennels still stood, although some were more covered in debris than others. They resembled tombs, vessels of old memories that lay forfeited the moment Ferox Malice had invaded the area. Chase sat for a long moment, walking through memories in his head. He revisited the loving smiles of old friends, the dogs outside of Adventure Bay they joined forces with. He almost smiled as he recalled dozens of missions and adventures all by memory, letting them play out in his mind almost as a desperate attempt to escape from reality. The sound of paws behind him snapped him out of his thoughts, as Rocky emerged at his left. "I packed my things," the mix said, wearing a green backpack. "It was really painful." Minutes earlier, Chase forced himself to walk through his kennel again, nothing looking the same anymore. He grabbed what mattered to him, the photo, and left swiftly. "I'm sure they're going to provide us with new things anyway." Rocky sat down. "Bella told me about the need for technicians in the guild," he stated with a slight hint of excitement in his voice. "I guess that's where I'm going." The shepherd beside him was unresponsive. Rocky frowned and opened his mouth to speak up when Marshall trotted over. Dragging a red backpack in his teeth, the spotted dog was noticeably happier than usual, likely usual optimism, otherwise he was putting on a joyful mask to hide his sorrow. "I'm taking all my medical stuff, I'm sure they'll appreciate that." He paused slightly. "I hope." Walking to Chase's right, he sat down with a sigh as he took in what remained of the tower. "At least, we're still together, right?" Rocky nodded silently, although the shepherd between them hung his head a little. He leaned on his back paws slightly, then draped an arm around the mix's shoulders. "Chase?" The gray dog was taken aback as he was slightly pulled in. "What are you dash?" Still unresponsive, Chase held out his other arm and entangled Marshall, pulling them both into a loving embrace. He choked out, "I really love you guys." A tear ran down his cheek. "I don't care if we aren't blood, there are no other dogs I'd dash." A hiccup escaped his muzzle. "I'd call my family." His brothers were surprised at first, but quickly met their own arms and formed a group hug, tightly holding one another. As much as Chase tried to keep himself together, the loving forgiveness of his family broke him. Quiet sobs began to leak from the shepherd, tears hopelessly streaming down. He deserved to cry, to finally let everything out that had been riding on him. Marshall wept as well, grieving for the fallen that were lost in the tower. Sky, who never had a chance, Rubble, who was taken in the beginning, and Zuma, who was left to comeuppance in the basement. Even Rocky was beginning to feel teary-eyed himself and shedding a few tears onto the grass, a landscape plagued with blood and suffering from the night prior. They finally released one another, looking around in contentment. 6 had been severed into 3, but their resolve would still survive. They were soon approached by Bella, her eyes soft with sympathy for the puppies. "Ready to go?" she asked simply, letting her eyes fall on each dog. They were silent for a few seconds, almost as if they were thinking over their decision, but Rocky smiled and nodded. "We're ready." Bella turned around and barked some commands to the soldiers, and they swiftly loaded their equipment into the helicopters, even dismantling the road barrier. One by one, the tactical dogs climbed into their vehicles, until the lookout's yard was empty and clear like nothing had ever happened. The helicopters roared to life, flaring their engines and spinning their rotors, the soldiers inside strapped in and removing their helmets. Still one remained, the pilot waiting up front for the signal to take flight. Bella gripped the side door and pulled it open for the puppies. With deep breaths and subtle gazes to the ground, Chase, Rocky, and Marshall all climbed in, stepping their paws on the sleek metal floor. Bella jumped in last, shutting the door and locking it, then nodding to the pilot. The ACG Armada all took to the skies in a beautiful formation, releasing their holds on the ground and rising high in the air like angels. The people of Adventure Bay all watched from below as the helicopters soared over the city like birds in the clouds. The military presence that had scourged the land was now leaving, and unbeknownst to the people, taking the remnants of the Paw Patrol with them. In a few short hours, the Archline Foundation would sweep through Adventure Bay, hunting for their prized assets only to realize they were never there. Their ultimate experiment had failed, and the blood of endless possible deaths was on their paws. Despite the work she was doing on a tablet, Bella couldn't help but flick her concerned gaze up to Chase. The shepherd was aimlessly sitting in his passenger seat with an emotionless expression. Sitting on his chair, seatbelt firmly gripping him in place, Chase idly turned his head to look out the oval-shaped window. He watched Adventure Bay gracefully shrink away as the Armada flew over the ocean, until it completely disappeared on the horizon like a blinking star in the sky. Deep in his mind, he still had questions that lingered around his head. He wanted to know where Ryder had vanished to, he wanted to know the motives for his old leader abandoning them. A sabotage had been made, an attempt to lock the pups away in the basement to be food for the creature. As much as he desired an answer, a part of him knew he could likely never get one. It mattered little, the shepherd internally scoffed at any excuse or explanation the boy could give him. Deciding he would no longer abide by a cowardly human, Chase internally damned Ryder and entirely swore his loyalty to Rocky's leadership. Dogs were to be loyal to dogs, and with the ACG, perhaps he had a chance at rebuilding something from the ashes after all. The end.
Okay. So, wir sind jetzt am Ende gekommen. Und bevor wir das hier beenden, ich habe hier ein paar Fragen geschrieben. Und die erste Frage ist, was hättet ihr gemacht, wenn ihr wie beim Geschichte gewesen hätten, in euren Chat so einen Lockdown gehabt hätten, dann was hättet ihr gemacht? Hättet ihr verlassen den Ort oder ihr hättet geblieben und so um den Monster zu besiegen? Oder die zweite Frage wäre, wenn ihr hättet gewesen ein von der Popschulhunde, wie hättet ihr reagiert mit aller Sachen, mit wer ist mit der Mundinfektion gewesen und wer wär's? Und was hättet ihr gemacht? Wäret ihr zu meinem ACG-Team gegangen und dort zu applyen? Oder ihr hättet direkt den Hund umgebracht, der wo mit dem Dings gewesen war, mit der Monsterinfektion. Und die nächste Frage wäre, wie hättet ihr reagiert, wenn ihr so in der Tower wäre und dann einfach wie das gewesen, aber einfach Karma bekommen, wenn man einfach das macht und dann einfach wie bei den Chapter, wo Summer Chase einfach reingeschifft in den Keller hat ihm einfach wieder reingeschifft, wo Summer hat angefangen Benzin reinzufüllen in den was hättet ihr dann gemacht? Hättet ihr nicht reingeschifft oder ihr hättet ihm reingeschifft? Was Chase alles gemacht hat und wie gelügt hat. Was hättet ihr reagiert? Hättet ihr ihm reingeschifft oder nicht? Für mich wäre es nicht reinzuschiften, weil sonst hättet ihr nochmal einen Hund verloren und so. Und was passiert hätte, und die nächste Frage wäre, was hättet ihr reagiert, wenn Summer und Chase beiden zusammen kämpfen? Und Chase hat probiert, ihm alles zu entschuldigen. Was hättet ihr reagiert, wenn ihr Summer wäret? Hättet ihr es angenommen oder angefangen zu kämpfen oder nicht akzeptieren? Und die nächste Frage wäre, was hättet ihr gemacht, wenn Summer nicht geschafft, wie nach dem Kampf mit dem Simon Chess, was hättet ihr gemacht? Hättet ihr ihm geholfen, ihn dort rauszunehmen, oder ihr hättet einfach ihn da verlassen? Wie bei der Geschichte war, Chess hat einfach ihn dort gelassen und der Monster hat ihn einfach genommen. Für mich wäre es gewesen, wenn man wieder hilft, ein Freund zu der, wo gehört, seine Familie ihm hilft rauszunehmen. Weil, wie es vor einem Bildschirm, die da waren nur die Überlebenden gewesen. Sonst, da wir schauen. Die nächste Frage wäre, ist, was hättet ihr gemacht, wenn jemand alles nicht fragt, was hättet ihr gemacht? Hättet ihr ihn gefragt und er hätte probiert dann zu sagen und so, oder ihr hättet einfach nicht fragen, Chase fragen. Für mich wäre es gewesen, wenn man ihn probiert zu fragen und dann hätte er vielleicht beantwortet und probiert nicht zu lügen zu erzählen. Und wie ihr gehört habt beim letzten Chapter, was hättet ihr gemacht? Hättet ihr noch gebloben oder zu einem neuen oder mit dem ACG gegangen, zum dort dann arbeiten? Für mich wäre es gewesen, wenn ihr hättet gesagt, ich will hier bleiben, dann hättet ihr nicht Überleben geschafft. Zum Überleben wegen es waren so wenig, wegen es haben viele verlassen, wegen einem Problem mit dem Monster und so. Und die nächste wenn ihr wäret Rider gewesen, was hättet ihr gemacht? Hättet ihr gebloben oder ihr hättet weggegangen und zum der Dings, wo Liberty dort am Arbeiten war? Für mich wäre es gewesen, wenn er hätte am besten gebloben mit seiner Familie, die Hundefamilie gebloben hätte. Oder von ein paar von die, wo vielleicht so alles entscheiden und so. Das wäre komplett falsch gewesen, einfach dass seinen Welpfreund die wo sprechen können und einfach die zu sterben lassen und so. Das wäre nicht gut gewesen. Am besten wäre gebloben gewesen. Sonst ja, wenn ihr könnt mich jederzeit etwas fragen und ich kann vielleicht noch euch, weil ich will nicht vieles mehr beantworten, weil ich weiß, dass ihr will schon etwas vielleicht anders tun oder so oder es gut schaffen. Deswegen ich werde auf Community einen Link lassen zu diesem Store, wenn ihr wollt auch das für den auch bei eurem Kanal auch diesen Story machen. Und vielleicht, wenn ihr Hilfe braucht, könnt ihr mich jederzeit fragen und ich kann euch helfen. Und wie ich bemerkt habe auf YouTube, ich bin der Erste, der mit dieser Geschichte fertig ist. Und der Creator, der diese Geschichte gemacht hat, einfach nur die Geschichte geschrieben oder nur das gemacht und nicht auf YouTube gemacht, diese Story durchlesen. Das sagt, ich bin der Erste, wo geschafft, diese ganze Geschichte zu machen. So, Lorelei ist immer noch, ist immer noch im Chapter, hat noch nicht ganz, er hat angefangen, aber noch nicht weitergemacht. Und deswegen, ich bin der Erste, der fertig war. Und noch zum Schluss, bevor ich euch lasse, ich habe hier noch 2 Geschichten, die vielleicht noch spannend wären, habe noch geschrieben. Eine wäre, da steht Pups Save Vampire Marshall. Das sagt, die Hunde retten der Vampir Marshall. Das aber auch auf der Website, wo Geschichten mit dem Bobschuh werden, habe ich auch einfach gefunden. Oder Brothers Until the End. Bobschuh wäre es auch gewesen. Sonst ich zeige es euch schnell, welche ich meine. Und dann, aber für das muss ich die schnell kurz suchen und dann öffne ich mich schnell weg. Dann soll ich dann zum Dings. Ich muss immer einfach schnell suchen. Da ist ein. Also ich bringe mal schnell. Ich ziehe mir einfach schnell mal ein bisschen mein Auto. Das wäre hier die Geschichte gewesen. Pups Save a Vampire Marshall. A Pop Truth Story wäre es auch. Aber wie ich es bemerkt habe, es hat 15 Chapters, aber es wird schon vielleicht ein bisschen dann kompliziert. Es zeigt mich dann komische Sachen und so, aber ich werde mal vielleicht testen und schauen, ob es geht. Wenn es irgendwie komisch gibt und so, aber wie ich bemerke, es muss eigentlich anders sein und so. Und ja, aber so gedacht. Weil ich probiere alles zusammen. Ich probiere alles so viel, weil ich kann leider nicht mein Words benutzen, weil mein Abo ist vorbei. Und deswegen zurzeit, ich benutze mache einfach so Sachen, ich öffne einfach das und es liest einfach dann für mehr und so. Und deswegen. Ja, aber so meine ich. Ist es so. Ja, wenn ihr wollt auch mal diese Story für einen Kanal machen, ich lasse einen Link in der Community und ihr könnt dort es benutzen. Also eigentlich nicht es ist nicht meine Geschichte, sondern die Geschichte von dem Creator watership02. Aber alle Geschichten von den Creators könnt ihr benutzen, weil für die interessiert es nicht. Ich habe nicht gefragt, ob ich darf. Aber ich weiß, dass ich habe auch viele andere Geschichten, die Geschichten aber auch gemacht, ohne zu fragen. Und hier wäre es gewesen, Brothers Until the End, Pop Truth Story. Und da jetzt gegangen mit Chase und Marshall sieht verschiedene Bilder mit denen und so. Und er hätte 9 Chapters gehabt. Aber ich probiere das auch das gleiche mit dem Dings und so. Das ist auch das gleiche da. Aber ich werde es mal testen und schauen, ob es irgendwo etwas gibt. Wenn es etwas gibt, dann probiere einfach es so zu machen. Oder also Leute, wenn ihr mal bemerkt habt, in einem Story habe ich Dead is Upon Us gemacht. Ich habe es auch so mal so gemacht. Und jetzt gehört so mit 111. Das ist diesen Sachen hier, das sind so Kommentare gewesen. Und also, wie ich bemerkt habe, diese Geschichte da, Brides Until the End, das ist kein Horror Story, sondern es ist einfach eine Story. Und Pop Safe Vampire Marshall, ich weiß nicht, ob das wirklich ein Horror Story ist, aber das weiß ich leider nicht. Sonst wegen Full Story machen, ich habe es bemerkt, es ist eine wirklich lange Geschichte gewesen, weil wenn ihr vielleicht zu meinen Playlist gehen und bis ganz nach unten, wo fängt den ersten Chapter an, seht ihr, dass es eine lange Geschichte ist. Dass es wirklich eine lange Geschichte ist, weil ihr seht, es hat fast, ich habe schon ein bisschen gezählt, aber weil ich muss noch wegen das schauen, weil vielleicht, wenn ich der Problem ist wegen beim OBS streamen, ich habe Angst, vielleicht wenn irgendwo ich bin und dann es abstürzt, dann ist es vorbei, dann ist, wenn ich schon 6 Stunden drin bin oder fast oder 4 und dann direkt ab und dann der Verbindung sich zertrennt vom OBS, dann ist es dann 4 Stunden verloren. Und deswegen beim PAW Lockdown, da wird es kein Full Story geben. Ich habe so geplant für mich selbst, weil mein Team ist gerade frei, also für mich selbst geplant, für meinen Kanal, zum Sicherheit. Ich werde nicht der Full Story machen, ich werde nicht Full Story haben, aber wenn ich habe auch in den Communities habe ich auch noch gelassen, ich lese es mal für euch, da muss ich suchen. Da steht, Leute, ich habe ein Problem, ich bin bald fertig mit dieser Geschichte und wenn ihr mehr PAW Stories anhören wollen, dann bitte schickt mir einen Link, dass ich mehr PAW Stories für euch weitermachen kann. Wenn ihr einen habt, dann schickt es mir durch meinen YouTube-Kanal bitte hier auf Community, bitte, das wird dankbar und bitte beeilt euch. Wenn ihr so eine spannende Geschichte findet, vielleicht beim Wattpad oder beim Funfair.net, schickt mir einfach einen Link, aber bitte, bitte mit PAW, nicht von anderen Sachen, alles nur PAW, das wäre dankbar gewesen. Und ja, das war es heute von mir. Danke, dass ihr dabei waren für für 2 Wochen gewesen dabei war für die Geschichte anzuhören. Und ich gebe ein Big Shoutout an mein Team und ich gebe einen Shoutout an euch Leute, weil wir sind auf 402 Abonnenten. Ich danke euch. Hoffentlich schaffe ich noch mehr Abonnenten zu kriegen, vielleicht schaffe ich bis 500 und so. Aber das weiß man nie. Und ja Leute, ich probiere jetzt schauen, wann ich mache, vielleicht eine von diesen Geschichten. Und wenn ihr Geschichten für mich habt mit Popkultur, mit Horror. Am besten mit Horror, wenn ihr etwas Spannendes findet. Aber bitte zuerst schaut auf meine Playlist und schaut zuerst die Geschichte, die ich schon gemacht habe. Die Geschichten, wo ihr mir dann schickt und die ich schon gemacht habe, das werde ich nicht akzeptieren. Nur die Geschichten, wo ich noch nicht gemacht habe, werde ich dann akzeptieren. Und ja Leute, das war's für mich für heute. Und wir sehen uns für dann ein Update. Ich werde einen Update-Stream machen dann. Ich werde dann mal einen Update-Stream machen, wie es geht mit dem Geschichten und so. Und ihr könnt jedes Mal wieder anhören,